The Battle of Iwo Jima. The Battle of Iwo Jima was one of the most important battles in the Pacific during World War II. The tiny 4.5 by 2.5 islands served both the United States and Japan a strategic advantage. For the United States, it served as a link from the Mariana Islands to Tokyo and its neighboring cities. The distance from Iwo Jima to Tokyo is about 650 miles, which was simple for the B-29 bombers to make round trips. However, with Iwo Jima run by the Japanese, they used radars to detect the US B-29 bombers in the route from the Mariana Islands to Tokyo and vice versa. This allowed the Japanese in Iwo Jima to intercept the B-29 bombers and warn the main island. Also, US crippled planes coming back from theater had no place to land but sea. The tiny island between Japan's mainland and the Mariana Island was the turning point of war and had to be taken. The island would provide the U.S. with 3 airfields, a fully operational airbase, and an emergency landing strip. The closer distance Iwo Jima would provide made it possible for the B-29 bombers to be escorted by fighter jets. Once taken over by the United States, a daily bombing campaign would be possible. The beginning of the United States' plan to take over the island was to continuously bomb it in an effort to soften up Japanese defenses. After 2 months of bombing, Admiral Nimitz, the commander of the campaign, sent arriving naval warships to blast the island down. The United States thought that after so much bombing of the little island, the battle would only last a short amount of time. However, the US troops were in for another big surprise. On February 19, 1945, D-Day arrived and the invasion began. Small boats escorting Marines from ships were expected to land 30,000 Marines by the end of that day. The amphibious invasion sent a Marine division to take over Mount Suribachi, which was the highest point on the island. While one division was taking over the mountain, another was going after the airfields. The Japanese let the beaches fill with Marines purposefully. General Kurabashi, Iwo Jima's commander, ordered to attack once the beaches were swarming with Marines. The Marines were surprised and did not know where the attacks were coming from until they realized that Japanese troops were in small fortifications on Mount Suribachi and across the hills. They had trouble maneuvering around the black sand that sunk to their ankles in every step. The sand also prevented them from digging into foxholes. Also, their equipment was delayed on the beaches due to the tanks and jeeps being stuck. The black sand and the surprise attack from the Japanese put the US Marines at a disadvantage. Once the Marines pressed through the beaches and found proper cover, they discovered that the Japanese had fortifications built into the land and could possibly be linked together. This meant that the Japanese troops could always maintain the element of surprise. After a post was taken out, it was only a matter of minutes that it was retaken on the ground. Also, the Japanese troops were not affected by the pre-bombardment the US made. This underground base that the Japanese built had everything from sleeping quarters to a hospital. With thousands of underground fortifications and foxholes scattered throughout Iwo Jima, it gave the Japanese troops a fighting chance. You may be wondering why the Japanese used such an unusual strategy. The reason being is that General Kurabashi felt that it was the only way his troops had a fighting chance. There were no reinforcements left available. Most of Japan's planes and ships were either destroyed or damaged in the Battle of Saipan and returned to the mainland for a final defense. The only way out of the island was victory. Surrender was not an option, it was considered dishonorable. Without any help, Kurabashi's plan was to hold off the island as long as possible, at any cost. On February 23, 1945, the US troops finally made it to the top of Mount Suribachi. A Marine photographer took a picture of the 5 Marines and a US corpsman raising the flag that created a famous picture of Iwo Jima. Moreover, the symbol of this flag, so high in the air, motivated American troops across the island to keep pressing forward. The remaining of the Japanese troops on Mount Suribachi tried to join forces up north. By February 28, 1945, although all 3 airfields had been finally captured, they were still surrounded by a great number of Japanese troops. The battle throughout Iwo Jima had been fierce, with the terrain being nothing but a big rock. The number of casualties and the absence of water on the island made it difficult to advance. For the next weeks, the Japanese put up a great fight in the valleys of the north, which was called Bloody Gorge, or Death Valley. Once most of the land had been captured, General Kurabayashi and the remainder of his men moved up further north to Katino Point, where they would make their last move. On March 25th, Japan's final move on Iwo Jima was led by General Kobayashi and his 200 men that did not have water or food for days. With little ammunition and strength left, they attacked the nearby US lines using swords and rage. The remaining Japanese troops on Iwo Jima were eventually overwhelmed, and the following day the island was secured. The United States suffered 6,821 deaths, and Japan suffered over 20,000. The Japanese did not have the manpower and equipment to treat their injured, and as an effect, they all died. After the Battle of Iwo Jima was won, US forces proceeded with their bombing campaign, and naval forces moved to Japan's final defense on Okinawa. Iwo Jima, the small 8-square-mile island, was one of the most brutal close-range battles, and has earned its place in history not only because it was the turning point of the war, but because so many American lives were sacrificed for such a small piece of land.